Hi, everyone. This is Brandon Corley here again with attorney Brandon Monk. Welcome back to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
So previously we discussed GHB specifically and the temporary scheduling that expired back in 2001. Today we're going to talk about kind of a subset of that law. The I guess it's 812G. Is that correct? Where it lists GHB and analogs as a controlled substance.
So we've got really two different theories of the case that are at work in the indictment here. We've got one theory that is a controlled substance analog theory, which is that 1,4-butanediol is the controlled substance analog of GHB. And then we've got this other theory that comes from a 2006 statute, sometimes called the Adam Walsh Act, which is that something in particular was done with 1,4-butanediol in that statute because it comes up by name there. But you have to parse, well, what did they do, right? Mm-hmm. And in both of these pass, it ends up being a dead-end road for the government, but this is the dead-end road that they chose to pursue through two different indictments.
Right. So the case we're talking about is the 2020 prosecution of Jake Daughtry with Right Price Chemicals. To my knowledge, that's the only case where this certain subsection of that statute's actually been prosecuted.
In the history of the world, no other person aside from Jake Daughtry has ever entered a guilty plea or been prosecuted to a final judgment of conviction. Yeah. There's been some other things that have been done with these analog prosecutions, but the reality is that fails as much as it succeeds because there's many experts that say 1,4-butanediol, even chemically, setting aside the legal conversation that we've already had, but chemically that it's not substantially similar, and so there's not an analog path for that reason too.
Right. And so in this case specifically, what are some of the things that the audience needs to understand before we kind of go into the background of the case? What kind of topics are we going to hit on here, and why you feel this is an unjust prosecution?
So I'm going to walk you through it kind of the way I came about helping these folks. These are good people in the community. These are people that my family knew from the community and knew to be good people. These are people that if you talk to other members of the community in Jefferson County and Nederland, they would tell you, hey, they have a good reputation. They try to do things the right way. These are people that, they sold fireworks. So during fireworks season, they would have the media, they'd have law enforcement over to their fireworks stand, and they'd be on TV, right? And they'd be doing, those early morning demonstrations to kind of give you an idea as to what to expect for the fireworks season and how to do it the safe way. They were the people that the media went to. They were the people that were looked to as pillars of the community. Joe Daughtry had served on Nederland City Council, and I knew about that being from that area. So I think first you kind of get to know the people, right? And so you think about the people, and the people are really good people. And then but then there's statements that go out to the media around the time of the raid that everybody grabbed onto, and they were statements like insane things that we'll talk about, but that they killed people,
rapists,
absolutely, and that they were selling something that was the date rape drug, right? That they were bringing up date rape and things like that. So those are the things that in press releases from the government were shot out there to try to contradict that good image that the Daughtries had earned through the reputation. But then overnight, press releases not based in fact by the government took that away from them.
Yeah.
So I saw some of those things happening, and I really, honestly, you look at it and you really don't want to believe that what the media is saying is true to a certain degree. And so you start with the people, and you know that the people were in legitimate business. They were doing a legitimate chemical business. You start to look at some of their business records and their sales records, and you see that, well, they're not just selling 1,4-butanediol. They're selling a broad array of chemicals. They've got a bunch of different chemicals that they're offering, and you can see their website, and you can see the labels on their packages, and you can see that they intended to sell this for legitimate reasons, and they're expressly telling you that, right? So you see, legitimate businesses paying their sales tax, paying their income tax, using bookkeepers in their business. The chemical business, Jake went so far as to hire a chemist to work inside the business to give advice about how to store these chemicals, how to handle them, how to make sure that the employees that were having to deal with them were doing it in the safest way, to the extent you're shipping and transporting these things, that to make sure that was being done in the safest way possible, compliant with the law. So you see a business that is spending money to be in compliance.
Yeah.
And then, you also see a business who is not afraid to go talk with lawyers and get legal advice. And, those kinds of things tell you that you're dealing with somebody that's just not a criminal, right? This is not the cartel.
Right.
This is a member of the community, and there's some information that's going out, and you can tell it's only part of the story, but that ultimately, you're dealing with good people. And so they kind of, the Daughtry's ended up. I was not Jake Daughtry's lawyer at the time of his guilty plea. I was not his lawyer then.
Yeah, let's get into some of the background on that. So you mentioned the fireworks business which the Daughtry's have owned and operated for last 35 years there in Nederland, Texas. And Jake was a part of that growing up. I believe he started helping his mom and dad with the fireworks business when he was about 4 years old. Grew up around fireworks. And then fast forward, they grow the business, stay in the same location, build a bigger retail store there. And then Jake goes off to college at Texas A&M, goes and gets his degree and comes back home and has a desire to start his own business, go into business for himself, much like his dad has done his whole life. So he comes home. Again, the fireworks business has been there for multiple decades at this point. And kind of get us into the relationship between Jake and his father in terms of getting the business going and overhead costs and that kind of thing, and kind of what the goal of the business is. This is a legitimate chemical distribution business, correct?
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. I mean, the Daughtry's had other businesses. They had sign business. They sold some storage buildings and things there, too. They have multiple different businesses, right, including the fireworks. But, yeah, Jake goes to school. He's thinking about maybe starting his own business. What do you start to think about when you're starting your own business? So I'm going to have to pay rent. I'm going to have to have big overhead costs in order to find out where I'm going to operate. If you're going to have, employees, you got to have enough space for these employees. And, that's not exactly, the easiest thing to do whenever you just got out of college.
Sure.
So he starts to think about, and they start to think together as a family about what resources they have, and they think, well, we've got this commercial building and we sell fireworks out of it during part of the year. And we have these other businesses that we run during, the rest of the year. But we do have some space, and we could kind of be creative about this. And we could say, well, we could even add a loft area, and then Jake would have enough space where he could operate his business. At least at the outset, he could operate it without having to pay rent. Yeah. Maybe at reduced rent, he'd pay his dad some rent. Enter into a lease in his, a little bit more flexible terms than he would have to if he's going out into the world, right? So there was, obvious advantages, I think, for saving money to get it going, but you could get it going faster that way too. They had that, and so they might as well use it to make maximum benefit out of it.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's what they were looking at, and so he comes back and they carve out a part of the building where he starts to open the chemical business, and they have employees working out of there, but it's mostly an online sales of chemicals.
Right.
But it's working pretty good. They start to build up a little bit of a list of customers. They're selling to people like the government. They're selling to SpaceX. I mean, they're selling to laboratories, a lot of laboratory chemical supply. But they're also doing a lot of different things. So when you're new in business, you test things, right? You test this, you test that, you see what works. And so, during the pandemic, for example, Jake had gotten and done a pretty good amount of isopropyl alcohol with hand sanitizer,
right?
Where they had found a way to source that in sort of a unique way because of what he knew from the chemical business. And he was, doing a lot of that at the time, but just a bunch of different things.
Sure.
Is what they were doing. Well, one of the things they sold was 1,4-butanediol. There's a system set up where you can be a registrant in the chemical industry, and you can sell certain chemicals that are listed chemicals that require you to be a registrant. Jake and his business, Right Price Chemicals, had decided not to be a registrant. So, they knew these listed chemicals, they're not going to be in the business of that. They can't even buy those. Right. But they're going to focus on these non-regulated things, and 1,4-butanediol was a non-regulated chemical that they offered for sale.
Yeah. So he comes back home, gets the business going, like you said, and so our audience understands that the concept of the business is buying chemicals, and not just chemicals, but lab equipment, other supplies too, industrial supplies, but buying specifically on the chemicals, buying these in bulk and then debulking them and selling them in smaller quantities. A laboratory may not need a whole drum of chemical X, right? So you can sell them in smaller quantities, and that's kind of the design of the business. More of a retail outlet versus a wholesale distributor.
Yeah, and I think some of it was about just offering a variety and sizes of distribution, because they could handle drums. I mean, there was nothing that said they couldn't do that. But I think he was looking at it as a way to offer customers more options. Yep. One of the side advantages of that was, when he got into building the web pages and the pages themselves, the more sizes you offered, you kind of got better rankings with some of that. And so, I think there were multiple reasons why he offered those things, but the business was about trying to fill a gap that these big chemical suppliers were not filling.
Right. Yeah, and to be clear, and this is just from my knowledge of the case, but correct me if I'm wrong anywhere. I mean, on his website, this is the Right Price Chemicals website, whenever the business was operating, it was clearly on the website that none of these chemicals were intended for human consumption. Is that correct?
Absolutely, 1,000% correct. I'll read you some of that language because it's important. Right Price Chemicals offers a complete line of laboratory chemicals and laboratory products, including the above sizes of 1,4-butanediol. Buy 1,4-butanediol and other laboratory chemicals online here at Right Price Chemicals. This is an industrial chemical and should not be used in or on humans or pets, and should not be used for food or pharmaceutical use. So he's telling you right there what he expects, and he puts on his website. But then he also goes the next step, and he has the customer at the checkout page agree to those terms and conditions on his website. So he's got that on his website expressly stating that the purpose of this is for legitimate uses.
Right. So it's pretty clear there. To your knowledge, if people remember several years back, there's an incident where youth in America were, whether it was a viral TikTok trend or whatever, were ingesting Tide pods, detergent pods. To your knowledge, did the government charge Tide with any felonies or crimes at all?
Not that I know of. Yeah, I mean, the other one I constantly reference is this. I mean, so people can huff gasoline. Yep. So does that mean we're going to stop selling gasoline? Yeah. No, you got to focus on the very small number of people that are abusing it. And, GHB and 1,4-butanediol, you get into the numbers and start looking at that, there are more people that die from Tylenol every year. So it doesn't make any sense to just go crazy with something that's useful.
Yeah, it feels like very much a manufactured charge, a criminal charge here. Now, as it pertains to 1,4-butanediol specifically, people are going to ask, well, I've never heard of that. Most people haven't, right? But there are real industrial uses for this chemical. It's not just a chemical that's out there that people abuse. There's actually industrial uses for it.
Industrial uses and consumer uses. I think most people would be shocked to know how many different products it's in. It's in spandex. It's in consumer products like makeup. It's in, and historically it had been in children's toys. Right. So almost all of your plastics and this movement towards bioplastics are based on a process involving 1,4-butanediol that allows it to be created without the use of petroleum products. So you're seeing a movement towards, as you see these products want to advertise that they're green products. Well, most of those products, they're plastic based. They're going to have 1,4-butanediol in them as well. And then you've got consumables that are out there on the market that you can buy that are, butylene glycol and 1,3-butanediol, which are very similar, but so many uses that we could almost spend an hour talking about the different uses. But it is widely used for industry. It is widely used with cleaning products. A lot of folks have found it effective for things like tire cleaner and wheel cleaner. Folks have found it effective for cleaner with electronics because it's more of an alcohol base instead of a water base.
Right.
So you can use it to clean things.
Stripping floors.
Yeah, you can't clean. So it's industrial uses, but it's also consumer uses. So people are using this for all kinds of things.
Right. And we kind of touched on this on the earlier podcast, but just to be clear, has the government ever mandated that that any business selling this chemical require some type of paperwork or authorization from the user? Give us a little background on that.
The government has never said that. There's not a law that says that.
Right.
And in fact, in this case, there's a DEA agent, well, not a DEA agent, an independent contractor that states that there's nothing that has the force and effect of law that makes the sale of 1,4-butanediol illegal. What the government tried to do in this particular case, because they had raided the property and they had made decisions about what they were going to do really before they consulted with the law and the facts, is they tried to work into a theory that there was some voluntary industry standard that the industry was all abiding by, and that somehow the Right Price Chemicals and Jake Daughtry should have known about that, and they should have done that voluntary industry standard. And further, if they didn't do it, that it would be a crime if they did not do this voluntary industry standard.
And this voluntary industry standard revolves around having the end user or the authorized purchaser agreement type thing, right?
Something like that. So the reason I say that is because it's looked like different things even from the government's perspective, right?
Sure.
Something like that is what they claim. They've claimed different things at different times. And times they've claimed if you were just in possession of 1,4-butanediol and you're selling it and you sold it over the internet, that was a crime in and of itself, under basically a strict liability theory. That just possession. Well, that doesn't make any sense. We have manufacturing facilities in the United States,
right,
for 1,4-butanediol, but at various times they've tried to put forward a theory that there was either an end user form that the customer was supposed to sign, or that there was some additional verification that might be required. But they moved to so many different chemical companies and so many different theories. None of that really holds. But in a criminal prosecution, you have to base it on the law.
Yes.
You cannot base it on what a private company is doing, that Jake Daughtry would have no ability to even know what that company is doing.
Yeah. And Right Price Chemicals was not a manufacturer, correct? They were just a seller of this product that they purchased from another entity, from a manufacturer.
Absolutely.
Or another distributor, correct?
They did not manufacture anything, right?
So
that's right.
So he had to purchase it from somebody else, meaning another company. Did Right Price Chemicals ever have to sign any type of authorization agreement to purchase this chemical, like the government's claiming is required?
So very close to the time of the raid was the first time.
And just for timing purposes for the audience, this is mid-July 2020 was whenever the raid occurred.
July 15th, 2020 was the date of the raid. That's right. Yeah. So just before the raid, I'm going to tell you November, December of 19, Silver Fern, who was the sole supplier to Right Price Chemicals during all the relevant times of this case, 2015 to 2020, has sent them a document that contained some language related to 1,4-butanediol that Jake had never seen before, that Right Price Chemicals had never seen before. And we ended up learning later in the case, Jake didn't know this at the time, but he ended up learning later that by that time the government had already made contact with Silver Fern, and they had already subpoenaed records from Silver Fern, and they were already in contact with Silver Fern related to Right Price Chemicals by the time that this document comes out. But the other thing that happens is there's an attempt made by Silver Fern to sort of go back in time and to create fabricated documents that would represent to the government that that kind of information had been going to Right Price Chemicals for a longer period of time, such that maybe they should have done something about it, right? And that all comes about, again, as a result of, you can kind of see the pressure here, where if there's an industry standard that's going to apply to Right Price Chemicals, then whatever the government is coming up with there, then Silver Fern should be complying with that too.
Correct.
Because they're selling this over the internet to Right Price Chemicals.
Yeah. I guess my point in bringing that up is, if you're saying there's an industry standard here, it's clear to me that nobody knows what that is, because there was, prior to, like you mentioned, in the fall of 2019, Right Price Chemicals had been purchasing and selling this 1,4-butane for several years without ever any type of end user authorization agreement or anything like that.
Yeah, and if so, let's say Jake wanted to do some research and say, well, what are other companies doing? If he was to go out onto the internet and search, he'd see Amazon selling this, eBay selling this, Walmart selling this online. All the big chemical companies are selling this online.
Right.
And there's nothing that would tell him from his research that he needs to be doing anything different. There's nothing from the law. There's nothing from what he's seeing from these other sellers. It's only when the government gets in the conversation that twists and turns into what it becomes later on.
So let's talk a bit about that. So prior to the raid in 2020, there were some packages, I believe, that were intercepted in Florida. And the Daughters received a phone call from, they didn't know who at the time, from the state of Florida about these packages. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think that the first thing that sort of gets on their radar is there's a couple of hubs that they identify. They're UPS shipping hubs because they use UPS to ship their packages. And their packages are coming up missing. And it's not necessarily only 1,4-butanediol at that time, that there's numerous packages that are coming up missing. And so they're noticing that trend, and they start to work with UPS to try to get, some idea what's going on. Mm-hmm. They get a call from Florida at some point, and somebody from Florida is on the phone calling this GBL. And they're saying things like that this is the concentrated form of GHB. And Jake hears that, and he says, no.
Right.
No, I got a sheet right here, a laboratory test that I can tell you that's not accurate information, what you're telling me now. So he's a little bit taken aback, but at the same time, he's not terribly concerned because he knows that he's selling 1,4-butadiol, which he's buying from somebody, and he's not a registrant, but he's getting it from legal channels, right? No real concerns at that stage. Go forward a little bit, and there is a subpoena request that is made from the DEA for certain packages, and that comes to Right Price Chemicals. And around that time, Jake is in conversation with attorneys. And because there have been, a couple of questions about the packages, and he can't really get answers from UPS, he starts to have a lawyer look into that, because he's also got another issue where some of his funds are held up from the sale of this. So he has a lawyer begin to look into this a little bit, and the lawyers that he goes to seek advice from, see that he's selling 1,4-butadiol, and they don't tell him that he's doing anything wrong. In fact, one of the lawyers recommends that, if you're having trouble with UPS, maybe just try FedEx. Mm-hmm. So nobody tells him or indicates that he's doing anything wrong, but at the same time, he sees the subpoena come through. He wants to do his due diligence, make sure he's getting his answers. So he also calls Beaumont DEA, and he's going to ask them, try to get the answer, well, what is your position on 1,4-butadiol?
So to back up, so they have the issue with the packages being intercepted. They have the issues with UPS. Some of the funding is frozen. They start obviously trying to seek answers. You know, are we doing anything wrong? What can we do on our end to fix this? They seek legal advice, and then they actually contact the DEA themselves, the local office there.
Yes.
And do you have a recording of that?
So that one we do have the recording of. We have not been able to recover the recording from the first call. There is one. The government had it at one point, but we do have the recording from the call to Beaumont. You want to hear it?
Yeah, let's take a listen.
Drug enforcement.
I was trying to get a hold of Catherine.
Yes, sir. Just a moment.
Thank you.
This is Catherine.
Hi, Catherine. I'm sorry, this is Joe. We got disconnected.
Oh, it's okay.
You couldn't hear me. I was talking. You couldn't hear me, and then I went to try and find out why, and you was gone. We got disconnected. So, you had asked what prompted the question. The call is because we shipped some chemicals and have shipped stuff down to just so we ship them all over, but we were shipping these, happened to go to Florida, and our packages come up missing.
They come up missing?
Yeah, our customers were saying that they were missing and that they didn't show up. We got to looking at the website and didn't know what happened to them, checked with UPS. They just stopped on UPS, couldn't figure out what was going on.
Uh-huh.
And we had a lady call us that had said that they had stopped this one package. This one package was a cleaner that this customer was wanting, which is a 1.4 butanediol. And he had ordered it, and this lady called and said that
That was the guy. That was the guy. He said the guy called. Somebody down there with the sheriff's office or something was calling him. It wasn't a lady.
Okay.
Okay.
The sheriff's office called the guy?
Yeah, and they were apparently asking him a bunch of questions about what he was going to be using material for or whatever, and the guy, he hadn't even picked the package up, and I guess they were saying that they had the package and saying that he couldn't be buying it or like
using it or anything.
Well, he had to have a use for it. Was he manufacturing something with it, or was he a distributor for it, or I don't know exactly what questions because I was getting it from the customer, but basically questioning him on what he was going to be using it for. And I guess this is after the package came up missing, and we had another customer call and say that her package, kind of the same way, but could never. They told her that she had to go pick it up at UPS. She showed up at UPS, and then they said it wasn't there. She asked more questions. Finally, found out that she's like, they informed her that it was picked up by some law enforcement agency, and that there was an investigation started on it or something, and that she couldn't pick it up. So then she calls us, and we're like, okay, well, we call UPS and try and find out information. They tell us that they have somebody call us, but nobody calls us back. And
okay.
So we quit shipping
well,
stuff.
Like I said, I'm not too familiar with the chemical side of things, but I can take the information you gave me and do some research.
We quit shipping
stuff. More familiar, look out to you.
We quit shipping stuff down there because of the fact that our packages are coming up missing.
And like I said, it's
right. So are you still shipping it to other places?
Yeah, I mean, I haven't.
We hadn't ever had any problem with shipping it. I haven't ever had any
problems. We've been.
Okay.
I mean, we've been in the chemical business for a while. I haven't had any problems with really anything up until now, and it seemed to be a localized problem in Florida, and I've continued to reference everything I've known to reference, which is the DEA's website, and it obviously being an item that's non-regulated, I just assumed that maybe there was a mistake or maybe I was missing something, but.
Well, I can't say whether the product is
do you not
regulated or not without doing some research.
You don't want to say about the other sheriff?
Like I said, that's something I would have
what they called it?
I would have to look up. I mean, I know like the main ones, and I know the ones we do inspections on, but I mean that list is pretty extensive.
Well, like I said, without it being, I would have thought that it would, if there was something out there that needed to be regulated at the bottom of y'all's DEA list there, it says that all they got to do is request if there's a problem with something, and it is a problem, all they have to do is request that it be put on there, and y'all would look at it and see about whether it needs to be put on one of the lists. I'm assuming if you needed to do that, that wouldn't be hard to do. Now, I will tell you that there was another phone call pertaining to this, and he got off another this. I got these two confused. We've only gotten one call from one particular person as far as this was a lady, a detective or something.
Because we didn't talk to the other
that had called, right. This was a detective that had called, and she was asking about this same product, and she says that we are not supposed to be shipping that there because it's an illegal substance. And I said, what are you talking about? And she named the name. And I said, we said, I don't believe so, ma'am. I said, it's non-regulated. And she says, it's GHB. I says, no, ma'am, it's not GHB.
That's the list one.
Exactly.
That's a list one, exactly.
We couldn't buy it.
And so we couldn't buy it because we done told you we don't have that. We don't have that. The number. We're not saying, and we don't want to buy it. We don't want to buy it. We don't want to sell it. We don't want to be.
The people or the company that you're buying this from, do they provide you any paperwork about it being a list one chemical?
No.
Oh no, it's everything. It's on the SDS sheet and everything. It shows it as a non-regulated. So when she come back and told us that, and I said, no, ma'am, we said, well, where did you get that information? We called Poison Control. And Poison Control told us that's what it was.
Uh-huh.
I said, well, ma'am, I said, we can call them. Do you have their number so we can call? Because I think that they're mistaken. And I said, this is not what that is. And she says, well, you don't need to be shipping this down here. And then she goes off into a different. No, I can't. I don't know the number. All we did is call the number.
She said we just needed to vet. Not that we shouldn't be shipping it. She said you need to vet the customers differently. Like basically insinuating that we needed to vet the customers somehow differently. Like the only insinuation I got was that it could. She didn't want it going to residential addresses, that it needed to be going to business addresses. But that's a whole.
Well, we have there's a reason for that, and we explain the reason for not to try and say that's we have to do that to protect ourselves for the credit cards until we get a new website. We're having a new website built. And what happens is when you send it, if it does not allow you, if you don't send it to the same address as the card holder that has and where the card is registered at to that address and the IP address of where the computer ordered it from, if you don't have a lot of this stuff together and send it to that same address, they can do a chargeback on you, and we've had it done with a number of different things where people do chargebacks and say they didn't get it or it didn't show up or what or whatever, anything, and you lose your money.
Okay, well, I tell you what, why don't let's see, what was the name of the product? You said it was one for butane.
Yeah,
butanediol.
Butanediol, yes, ma'am.
Okay, let me look. Do some research and reach out and see if I can see what's going on.
And as far as the court case, there was a court case pertaining to this we did look in doing and trying to do some research on it. There was a court case a while back pertaining to someone insinuating, and I think there were some people got arrested in it for selling it as GHB, and it went to the federal court. The federal court said had some chemists there that testified that it's not even in the same, anywhere close to the same chemical. That's not what it is.
Because whoever was doing it was trying to.
Have you had any calls or complaints regarding this substance? About people abusing it or anything like that?
No, we haven't had.
Not
other than the one lady.
Okay, just the one lady.
That's this one lady that called. Made that when I say she was a detective, that one that was calling in this particular about this particular deal, saying this. We haven't had them other complaints. That's why we're trying to figure it out as to what we need to do.
Like I said, what's a good contact number, and I can reach out and see if I can find anything out for you.
409 540 0856.
Okay, and what was your name again?
Joe Daughtry, DAUGHTRY.
Okay. All right. I'll try to see what I can find out and reach back out to you hopefully tomorrow, but I'm going to be out for a little bit in the office doing some field work out of the office, so I'll definitely try by the end of the week.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, appreciate it, and then also if you can check and see it. I don't know whether this is in your part of job duty or not, but I guess we're curious about how they're able to because we're scared to send anything.
No, I would definitely try to do due diligence on your part and make sure that what you're shipping is what you think it is. I mean, that's all I can say for now until I find out some more information.
Yes, ma'am. And that's what we're trying to do, and that's what we've done.
Okay. All right. I'll try to reach back out to you as soon as possible.
Thank you, ma'am. Appreciate it.
All right.
It's pretty clear and convincing that Right Price Chemicals was trying to do some due diligence there, and they even referenced it at the end of the call.
Yeah, to me, so putting this in the context of a criminal case, there's a concept in the criminal case called mens rea, okay? Mens rea is the idea that generally, if something's going to be a crime, you should know that it's a crime, and that you should have some kind of intent that is criminal intent, okay? So what I hear when I hear that call is I hear people, Jake and Joe, that don't know. They don't know, okay? Right. So they definitely can't intend to do something wrong if they don't know. And they're seeking for answers in this all of this. So that's what I hear when I hear that call. The other thing I hear
real quick on that, she mentioned a return phone call. Did Daughtry's ever receive a call back?
Never got a call back. Never got a call back. So the other thing that you think of is if the DEA doesn't know, then how is Jake supposed to know?
Right.
It's extremely unfair. So with just those things in the context of the ordinary criminal world, sort of textbook 101 criminal law, it's not a crime if you don't know what you're doing is a crime.
Right.
It's not a crime.
Right.
So that's pretty apparent from the call. And we've had, Supreme Court justices that have reasoned through things in similar ways. I mean, there's nothing you could think that would represent that idea more than calling the DEA. The other aspect of that is, would you call the DEA if you knew it was illegal?
Right.
They're going to arrest you.
Yeah, it's pretty troubling that, and I understand that the DEA doesn't prosecute cases, but they were used heavily in the prosecution of this case by the Justice Department, and the fact that sounds like they don't even know what this chemical is, but yet they're using DEA witness testimony in order to try and get a conviction of the Daughtry's is I find troubling.
It's extremely troubling. There, in particular, there is one agent, Agent Barra, and this is the agent that signs the warrant to obtain search warrant for emails, and signs the warrant associated with the raid as well. And I found other affidavits from this particular agent where the DEA is not making a distinction between these three substances. You have GBL that's come up in the conversation, you have GHB that's come up in the conversation, and you have 1,4-butanediol. Those are the three that I'm talking about. the DEA just sort of lumps them in there together and says GHB / GBL / 1,4-butanediol. We don't have to distinguish it. If you have any of those things, then we're just going to treat them all as the same thing.
Right.
But the laws don't treat them that way.
Right.
So the DEA's position in this that they've taken is not supported by the law. And the evidence that we've seen of this is in other cases, Bear signed affidavits saying, hey, just, I'll call it GHB at the first part of the affidavit. Later on, the same substance when I'm talking about it, I'm going to start calling it 1,4-butanediol. In the early DEA 6 reports, in this case, in the Daughtry case, the government wrote in those reports that it was GBL. They were literally writing in the reports that the substance that they were investigating that they thought they were dealing with is GBL. It's night and day difference. GBL is a listed chemical. You'd have to be a registrant to even be in possession of it. You would know that it's a listed chemical because it appears in a statutory list where Congress put it in that list. On the other hand, 1,4-butanediol, you buy it without being a registrant. It's not on any statutory list. It's treated totally different. But then for them to treat 1,4-butanediol like the laws of GBL apply to it results in this unfair outcome.
Right. And the government's treating them, or lumping them in together like this because 1,4-butanediol, when ingested, metabolizes into GHB essentially in the body. However, in their natural state, I believe there was a chemist that testified that they're not really that chemically structurally the same. Is that right?
Absolutely. So Melissa Taylor was the chemist that worked in Jake's business, and she has experience. She worked at the Jefferson County Crime Lab. She had experience with that kind of work, but she's a chemist in industry, and she deals with these kinds of things there too. And yeah, I mean, what you have is you have one chemical that is an alcohol, and you have another chemical that is an acid. And for chemists, I mean, they tell you that alcohols and acids are in two different chemical structures. They're in two totally different chemical worlds.
Mm-hmm.
So just from a chemical structural standpoint, if you were to diagram out the molecular structure, there's going to be a significant difference between that alcohol and that acid is another way to look at that.
Right.
And she expressed all that in her testimony and a declaration and a report.
Yeah.
And that's somebody else Jake had in his business, right? So, and again, talking about what he knew, this is who he's listening to.
Right.
And by the way, I don't think she's giving wrong information.
Correct.
I think she's given the right information. It's just that it gets twisted when the government tries to convert it to a prosecution.
Right. Yeah. Okay, so they reach out. This is I presume this is fall of 2019. They're reaching out. Is that correct? To the DEA, the local DEA there in Beaumont, not really getting a return call. They're also reaching out to their attorneys at the time for legal counsel on this. All the signals at this point in time are you're doing nothing wrong. There's nothing illegal about this substance. You have no issues with selling it as you have been.
Exactly. Nobody's telling them to do anything different than what they're doing, other than maybe try FedEx because your packages are getting lost.
Right. Right. Now, at the time, and actually for several years prior to this, of course, we don't know this at the time, but it comes out later that that the government's actually been investigating Right Price Chemicals for quite some time before that, right?
Correct.
Yeah.
So the relevant time period of the investigation that the government puts in the indictment is 2015 to 2020.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's important.
Yeah.
There's some reports in the case that go back to 2015, but there's a lot of activity in 2018 time frame, early 2018. So it looks like that there was an ongoing investigation, but we do know where that stems from, and we know there was investigation of other entities that kind of came before that one that helped us fill in the timeline there a little bit too.
Now, is it reasonable to assume, and maybe it's not, but would the DEA, the local DEA office there in Beaumont, have any knowledge of this ongoing investigation? Would they be working in tandem with the government? I guess what I'm asking is, was the agent or the investigator that the Daughtry spoke to, is it reasonable to assume she was aware? She was likely unaware of any investigation at the time.
So the government wrote some reports to try to answer that, but the reports that they write related to the contact between Florida and Beaumont don't come until months after the purported conversations occurred.
Okay.
So I would tell you I'm a little suspicious about that. It seems like to me that the government, at least in the narrative they present in the criminal discovery, is that they're trying to make it seem as though that there was, maybe a coordinated effort there. I don't really see that because there wasn't a lot of activity coming out of the Beaumont office.
Right.
Most of the activity related to the early DA6 reports were coming out of Florida.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So then we get into spring and summer of 2020, which, as everybody knows, is whenever the COVID pandemic really took over in the United States. Right Price Chemicals at the time, you mentioned it earlier, kind of positioned themselves to be able to help in that regard by through propylene glycol and isopropyl alcohol, things used for hand sanitizer, sanitation purposes, help out the medical industry, healthcare.
Everybody needed it
and
at that
general
time.
public, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, remember, everybody, all the businesses, small businesses were trying to get a hold of it, and there were shortages and things like that. And so they had, they had some members of the community that they were going to sell to, but they were also looking to help. You know?
Yeah. And then we get to July 15th, 2020. This is the day that the government raided Right Price Chemicals, which is still in the same building area as the Daughtry's Fireworks building and the sign business and a couple of other entities. But they raid Right Price Chemicals and the fireworks business and also the residences of the Daughtry's all on that same day. Now, is there anything interesting about the timing of July 15th?
It's close to the end of fireworks season is what you look at there, right?
Yeah.
And it starts to show up in the reports that the government waited until July 15th because by that time deposits from the recent fireworks season that's just concluded have sort of settled into the bank, but they hadn't yet, or were just on the cusp of, in some cases had written checks to pay off vendors and things like that. So the government had kind of watched their financials for some years through bank records and things like that, and they knew this was a critical time to seize.
The indictment was handed down more than a month before the raid happened. Is that correct?
June 3rd, 2020.
Yeah.
And they don't execute it, even though they could have executed it before the fireworks season. They wait until after the fireworks season to execute it. And at the time that they're signing affidavits to go get more money, they're saying, hey, please give us permission. We know this is fireworks money, but we'd like to seize this fireworks money.
Right. Yeah. And then you hear about in the press releases in the media shortly after the raid, well, they were selling this out of the fireworks building. You had people, all kinds of things that were said in the media, right? My question basically is, which is more rhetorical than anything, is if the Right Price Chemicals and Jake's Fireworks was such a dangerous entity and, they were quote unquote killing people by selling this chemical, I don't know why the government would have waited 6 weeks to perform the raid.
Well, I mean, go back to the investigation, right? Like you pointed out, the investigation was going on for years before that. So if they really think that's what's going on,
right?
What do you need to investigate? If they really thought that the theory was, well, if you have 1,4-butane and you're selling over the internet, what more do you really need to investigate? What are you waiting on if that's the case?
Right.
It doesn't make any sense.
Yeah.
So there was something else that was going on there, and there's some other layers of this. It helped the government to make the Daughtry's look like they were money launderers and that they were operating some kind of chemical trafficking organization.
Right.
It helped them because they were customers at this particular bank, community bank, that was already under investigation by the government, and part of the investigation of that bank dealt with the fact that these customers are doing things at that bank that should have been reported, and that these were transactions that look like suspicious types of transactions that might be money laundering. So their success eventually against Community Bank, where they get a consent judgment against them for $7-8 million, stems in large part from what they're able to portray that the Daughtry's are doing there, even if it's not true. Right?
Yeah. So they have leverage over the bank in that regard. So we get to the raid. Raid happens. Was there an abundance of this 1,4-butanediol on the premises? I mean, the way it sounded like they were going to have drums and drums of this stuff? To my knowledge, there actually probably was very little, if any, on the property.
Very little. There were some sort of misrepresentations made about an order that was placed by Right Price Chemicals, where Silver Fern had told them that there wasn't going to be this stuff available, so they hadn't had it delivered very recently.
Right.
So there were some barrels and things there, but at the raid, from the information that I've received, the folks that were there were looking for something different than that. They were looking for signs of other activity,
right?
Like that they were manufacturing things,
right?
And there were DEA scientists that were there at the raid, and I think the indication would be that if they were if they're taking 1,4-butanediol and they're manufacturing and turning it into GBL or GHB, which is a process that might be available. Well, then again, the government would have them on something that would be a crime, right? But then when they get there, there's no manufacturing that's ongoing. The information we get from the raid, and this is something that Sandy will tell you about directly when you talk to her, is that the conversation shifts to, we're gonna have to let them all go, and she does a good job of talking about that.
Yeah. So it sounds like the prosecution keeps having to pivot based on what they find, essentially.
Pivot in ways that we don't even know about with the grand jury.
Sure.
Okay, first. Pivot the day of the raid,
right?
In addition to that.
Yeah.
Pivot after the raid when they realize that the law is not going to support the prosecution. Yeah, they pivoted so far now they turned around 360 degrees and fell in the dirt.
and they arrested everybody, essentially everybody on the premises that day, from my understanding.
Yeah.
Jake's whole family and his employees.
All his employees. This is a business, a legitimate business. He was paying employees. He was paying payroll taxes. He paid a payroll tax vendor. He was helping people build their futures. He was helping people raise their families by employing them in this business.
Yeah.
And they all had to face consequences to some degree. Now, there were some that had charges dismissed, and there are different results in different cases. But to be raided and arrested, and all the employees that were there were treated that way.
Yeah,
that's not right.
So the raid happens. You mentioned in the media the releases that were going out, statements from the government side of things. Not only does that just put the Daughtry's in a bad light, but it also potentially taints a jury pool. I mean, the case is going to be tried right there locally, correct?
Absolutely. So the potential jury would have come from the area. They released statements to the media that were along the lines of that investigators had determined that certain deaths were caused by the ingestion of 1,4-butanediol. Since then, Jake has received expert reports that show definitively there was no way that they could have ever made those kinds of claims. And those things were released in the media. The media picked up on it, talking with some of the local reporters. That's the thing that got people's attention. That's the thing that made people pay attention to the story at all. Right. And what were they going for? I mean, they knew what the end result of that was, and they began, as soon as the raid occurred, to really get that information out there. At the same time, the Daughtry's were restricted from the information that they could provide to the media, because there were certain orders in place that kept them from talking to one another. I think there were certain orders in place that kept them eventually from being able to talk to the media, and gag orders that were put in place to restrict the government too. But you get those statements out
by
there,
that point,
the bell's rung, right?
Yeah.
That's what the people have heard it by that point. So then your fight is, okay, well, you're the Daughtry's, and you have an expert report now that says all that was not the truth. Yeah. Can you ever get back to that point and have as much media coverage as you had when it first came out?
Yeah,
that's what you want.
Right.
That's not
unlikely.
easy. That's not easy. Yeah.
Right. So all of the arrests happen. It's clear from the beginning that, at least in my opinion, that they really wanted Jake Daughtry is who they were really gunning for in terms of locking away. But they were willing to use leverage all around him to succeed in that. And I believe at his arraignment, I believe his parents at the time had already been not released from the charges, but released from custody at that point. And I think when Jake had his arraignment hearing, the defense attorneys brought up the fact that, hey, this, the same things that we talked about Right Price doing their due diligence. They brought up the fact that, hey, you can easily buy this at Walmart and Amazon and eBay, and they actually showed screenshots of the internet pages for that. And then I believe later on there was witness testimony that somebody close to Jake actually purchased this from either Walmart or Amazon to prove that there was no end user agreement required to do so, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, so some of the animus that they showed was one of the names for the operation was Jake the Snake. So going back to that comment,
yeah,
that's, I mean, they were, absolutely, they had animus towards him.
Yeah.
Commonly with federal prosecutions, they will, charge as many people as they can charge, get as many co-defendants in the equation as they can get, and get as much leverage as they can over the person that they're really going after.
Yeah.
In this case, they had his employees, and Jake cared about his employees. He still cares about his employees to this day. One of the reasons that he's fighting all of this is because he thinks that what was done to them was absolutely wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But they also charged both of his parents. They charged his mom, knowing that his mom is not really even in the conversation as far as any of this chemical business goes, and they
Right.
knew that, right? Eventually, they dismiss the charges against Sandy, but they do that in a way that is set up to where they would only do it, they tell him, if Jake would plead guilty.
Mm.
They threaten his parents that they will die in prison if Jake doesn't plead guilty. They make Jake's guilty plea contingent on his parents'
Freedom
results.
Yeah.
Whatever that may be. For his wife, it was for Sandy. For his mom, it was a dismissal. For his dad, it was, probation, a lesser sentence that he wouldn't have to go to jail.
Right.
But they traded on those things, and Jake had just had a child, and they used the timing of that, and they used the fact that at the time Jake had a different lawyer. I was not his lawyer at the time.
Right.
And there were all kinds of pressures associated with whether he could even go to trial with his counsel at that time, because they were not ready. They weren't helping him prepare his exhibits. They hadn't looked at the law of the case other than look at the internet and the DA's website to find out what the law was. And so he gets put in a position where he feels like at the time there was no other choice in the matter. It's not a choice.
Right.
I mean, they took the choice away from him when that many things are going on.
Yeah, and just beyond the leverage of it all, I believe at the time there were conversations. I think Jake probably felt kind of like he was in between a rock and a hard place. We mentioned earlier, but I think it's important to talk about this concept of strict liability. And I think at the time, the belief was that to convict you, they don't need to prove that you knew you were doing anything wrong.
They started to convince, and even within Jake's camp of lawyers, there was some thought process that this was going to be a strict liability type offense, is what they started to talk to him about. Meaning, yeah, that if he just sold it over the internet, then he was guilty. Well, he did. Okay, yeah. Jake's not a liar.
Right.
So this is not a circumstance where he's going to go make up an alternate truth to show that he's innocent. He thought he was innocent on what he was doing, and he is, right?
Right.
But yeah, I mean, that's where they end up going with it. And
so as discovery starts coming out, can you talk about Jake at the time is going through all this evidence as it comes out, trying to sort through it all? I mean, we're talking tons and tons of data that discovery that defense has to go through, and Jake's trying his best. He ends up finding which I find shocking. He ends up finding some emails that he doesn't recognize and start doing some research, and come to find out emails in discovery were fabricated and proven so. Can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yeah, so Jake eventually proved it through a forensic expert, computer expert, right? But he had to start somewhere on his own before that, because he, getting resources to get experts, it's sort of like you have to prove it first sometimes in this business.
Yeah, to be clear to the audience, so all of his assets are frozen. He can go to the court and request some of those funds to be released for defense purposes, but like you were saying, he's got to prove that he has...
He's got to show that he's got some reason to be spending the government's money, right? So he gets in a position where he's looking at his discovery, finally gets some of these emails. They were sending him out discovery sort of in batches, but he gets some of the emails. He starts to look at them. And I think, first impression is he recognizes this is not what was sent to me at the time that I was in business. And as he thinks about it a little bit more, he remembers that he had copied some of his emails to a Hotmail personal email address, such that he might have some copies of the real emails that would be available, so that he could try to compare those.
And this is correspondence between Jake, Right Price Chemicals, and the supplier, his supplier, Silver Fern Chemical.
Exactly right. Yeah, okay. These are purported emails from Silver Fern representing to be communications related to purchase orders and documents that may or may not have gone with those purchase orders, right? And one of the documents that was brought up in the call by Joe is the SDS. So the SDS is a document that talks about certain information about a chemical.
The hazards and
how to handle it.
Right.
And really it's kind of this idea that, well, if you're going to be handling this in shipping, if you're going to have employees handle it, then they should know how to do that in a safe way. With some chemicals, there's specific instructions they need to get.
Yeah, and just to be clear, for the honest people that don't know, every chemical everywhere has an SDS associated with it.
Right.
Every business has to have a copy of all of the SDS sheets for any chemical that they have.
Yeah, and they're generally pretty standard.
Right.
They generally come from information that comes from the manufacturer, because for somebody, at Jake's level of sale, to go change the content of that is pretty ludicrous. He's receiving it, and he's going to pass the information on pretty much similar to what he's receiving is the idea with that SDS. Right. It's not required with every shipment too. Sometimes people get confused by that, because there's some regulations that say, well, if you're shipping hazardous, a designated by definition hazardous substance, well, then you have to have an SDS, because you need to know right away what is the handling instruction for that.
These are explosives and acid.
Yeah,
and
but 1,4-butanediol was not a hazardous substance.
Right.
It was non-hazardous by definition, meaning it did not have to have one shipped with every shipment.
Right.
But the emails the fabricated ones purport to have sent an SDS to Jake that he never actually received. That SDS is also a document that Special Agent Alan Pry with the IRS claims that he found at the raid, not the day of the raid of July 15th, 2020, but in this period of time where the government maintained access to the premises in the days following the raid, where the Daughtry's weren't there, and where by that time the Daughtry security footage had been shut off from their property. And he's there, and he's making additional searches, he claims, and he claims to have found this SDS, which has very strange information in it.
Yeah, that's one I want to talk about a little bit. So it's not just the fact that there was an SDS either attached or not attached. People say, well, that's no big deal. But it's not just the attachment itself. The body of the email was changed to reference this SDS, which points to language specific to people abusing this and whatnot, which is unheard of really on kind of an SDS sheet.
Absolutely. Nothing on SDS is going to be talking to you about that this is a central nervous depressant like the inserts that you would see if this was a pharmaceutical drug, right? That people are going to be consuming.
Right.
So, but then also it's typos and things like that are in this fabricated SDS that they claim and make it look like is being sent in these emails, but was not actually being sent with these emails. So, yeah, the emails are fabricated, but then you've got this other document that an IRS agent has claimed to put his hands on, and what they're really trying to do with this is they're trying to explain how he found that document at the shop.
Right.
Offer some legitimate explanation, because otherwise Silver Fern and the communications between the government and Silver Fern has not been able to establish that they ever even sent the SDS to Jake Daughtry and Wright Price Chemicals, that this one that this agent particularly found.
Yeah.
So a lot of movement towards trying to offer some explanation. Eventually, there's an independent contractor who emails Silver Fern and says, find it. You've not given me this SDS, and all these prior subpoena responses that we've requested from you, and all your responses, you've never provided this SDS. You need to find it. I'm attaching it here for you to find it, right? Well, then after that, we get some fabricated emails that purport to deal with this SDS.
And so the IRS agent that purportedly discovered this I assume this was on maybe Jake's computer at his office, or?
No. So, on the computer, which is a whole nother interesting story, but the computer, they claim that they destroyed it. They didn't admit that to Jake until months and months and months after the raid, after I got involved in the cases, when they finally admitted that. They claim they found it at Jake's desk.
In a hard copy form.
A hard copy, a paper form of this document.
Okay.
And now, this, remind you, they've already raided, right?
Right.
They didn't find this the first day that they were there.
Sure.
Would you think that they might look at Jake's desk the first day that they were there and inventory the document at on Jake's desk?
Yeah.
No, they found this in the days after, allegedly.
Yeah, and so this was proven in court. An employee for Silver Fern, Gilda Franco, admitted to fabricating the emails in question. No real consequence there, doesn't sound like.
Well, so Gilda does claim that she's a fabricator,
right?
Through a memo, not that she writes, but through a memo that Silver Fern's lawyers write.
Oh.
Gilda's lawyer has said that Gilda didn't do this to the court. Gilda has been somewhat shielded from further questioning, other than by the government. And when the government had a chance to look into this further and try to find out the answers, they did not record the interview with Gilda Franco. So they go talk to her, allegedly, the same IRS agent that found, quote unquote, found the SDS at the shop, is one of the ones that participates in the interview of Gilda Franco. And what we get out of it is a memo that he writes, where he says what Gilda Franco said.
Yeah.
So we have Silver Fern saying what Gilda Franco said, supposedly through their lawyer, and we have the government saying what Gilda Franco said, and it's the same cover-up guy, right? But do we really know at this stage who fabricated the document? I would say that part has not been proven in court. What has been proven in court is that there is fabricated documents that were used against Jake Daughtry in the prosecution.
Yeah. So where we're at now is because of the things we mentioned earlier with the leverage and strict liability, Jake has pleaded to these charges. And so currently he's serving a 15-year prison sentence, federal prison sentence. And so what's next? What's moving forward? We're trying to get, obviously, this sentencing reversed, undone, based on ineffective assistance of counsel because of the pleading guilty to a crime that really wasn't a crime.
Yeah, the procedural vehicle for Jake's relief at this point is a 2255. That's a statutory form of the motion. Ineffective assistance of counsel was not waived by his guilty plea, so those claims are still available to Jake, and he's pursuing those. But then, the concept that he's legally innocent, that this is not a crime, that even if he was to say, I sold 1,4-butanediol, well, the court shouldn't have accepted that as a crime because there's no legal underpinning for that.
Right.
So that's part of his 2255 as well, and he's seeking relief from the court on both of those issues.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Criminalized. Remember, in today's America, when the feds can target the innocent and the law can punish without crime, freedom becomes fiction, and anyone can be a criminal. Learn more about this case on our Substack, titled Stop Overcriminalization.